You are listening to Autistic Stuff for Autistic People, a podcast in which a few autistic friends talk about their lived experiences and special interests. We are here to invite you into our world as autistic peers sharing relatable conversations about life as autistic people. This podcast is for autistic people and anyone that lives with, works with, or loves an autistic person. I am Cheryl, and I am an autistic peer support coach and BodyTalk practitioner who helps clients discover clarity, reconnect to the wisdom of their bodies, and learn to love and accept themselves more fully.
I'm Patrice, and I am an internal family systems informed practitioner, and I help autistic women and members of the Irish diaspora.
And I'm Mati, and I'm an autistic peer support coach and rabbinical student and spiritual director.
So welcome back to another episode of Autistic Stuff for Autistic People. Today we are going to talk about healing from the perspective of autistic people who have lived much of our lives disconnected from our bodies, emotions, and inner wisdom. The reasons for that disconnection can range from living for decades not knowing we were autistic, as well as trauma, abuse, interoception challenges, and more. Specifically, we are going to explore internal family systems, BodyTalk, and somatic techniques, 3 approaches to healing that have transformed and deepened our relationship with ourselves. This is a topic that will explore our lived experiences and provide us an opportunity to do some fun info dumping. It is also a source of our joy that we're excited to share with you. Today, you get to join Patrice, Mati, and Cheryl as we discuss our unique definitions of healing, provide a brief overview of IFS, BodyTalk, and somatic techniques, and explore how these modalities have changed our lives in several important ways. Before we dive in, I have one big caveat. Patrice is a trauma recovery coach certified through the International Association for Trauma Recovery Coaching, and she specializes in providing internal family systems informed coaching for autistic women and those navigating the unique task of Irish diaspora healing. Mati is a seasoned educator specializing in autism and disabilities, serving as a teacher, consultant, peer support coach, mentor, and guide, all from a neuro-affirming and trauma-sensitive approach. I am an autistic peer support coach, as well as a certified BodyTalk practitioner with the International BodyTalk Association. I specialize in providing clarity coaching and BodyTalk sessions for late-identified autistic women and spiritual abuse survivors. In other words, we are not therapists or medical professionals. Everything we talk about today is based on our personal experience and should not be taken as advice or recommendations. We encourage you to look into these modalities for yourself and discuss any new approaches with your doctor and/or therapist before working with a new practitioner. Now that we've got our disclaimer out of the way, let's go. First things first, what is healing? I think we should talk about this for a few minutes first, because my understanding of healing from a neurotypical capitalist lens has always been fixing myself, fixing something that's broken, or making myself feel better enough to get back into productivity mode. So I would love to hear your thoughts on how do you define healing for yourself?
Yeah, for me, at this point in my life, it's about sustainability. What is a sustainable and loving and compassionate relationship with myself, with other people, and with the world? I think I'll leave it at that for now.
Healing is one of these words that always throws me a huge curveball. It comes up, we're speaking about trauma and bodies, something that comes up often in spaces that I lead is this guideline for trauma dumping versus sharing, right? And where is that line actually drawn, right? And I always think of it in my own head and my guidelines as, are you actually healed or in a process of healing of this thing that you're talking about, or are you actively going through it? I think in many ways we never heal, and in other ways we do. What is healing? Is it never thinking about it again, never getting triggered by something ever again? I'm not sure. For me, in my own life, and I try to impart this, but I think healing is ultimately going to feel different to everybody. We're all going to have maybe a different way of looking at it as practitioners and as people. But healing is when you're able to face life in a fundamentally different way than you were before. And it doesn't necessarily mean things are resolved, but they aren't actively triggering you on a daily basis and then kind of lurching and leaking into every aspect of your life. So a concrete example, if I had a messy romantic relationship at some point that I was hurt at, I would say that until I could have a romantic relationship in which I'm able to engage in a healthy way, I would say that's not healed. If I kept repeating the same kind of things over and over and dishing out and like projecting the old person onto the new person and projecting my own insecurities on another one, I would say that's coming from a place where you're not healed. Right? Does that mean that you ever kind of forget about what happened in the past? No, I don't think you should even. Right? I'm not even sure that's like the idea. But like, whatever the thing that has hurt you or things are not actively showing up 24/7. Like, can they maybe come up sometimes? Sure. Like, we can all have triggers and we don't, right? I'm sure Patrice will give us an amazing definition of what trauma looks like and how it sits in our bodies, right? And how those different parts speak to us. But I think it's about that active, overarching kind of the thing that hurt is continuing to come up. So healing is being in a place where that's not the case. That was a really long thing, so hopefully Aradia will edit some of that out.
Well, I thought it was really interesting because you alluded to this idea that it's not just like a flip that we switch, like it's not, oh, I was traumatized and now I'm healed, before and after. It's much more oftentimes this journey that we're on, and it's, can come in waves, and it can come, sometimes we feel like we've addressed something or we've healed something, and then somebody, comes across our path and we have that experience with them and we go, oh, there's another little piece that maybe I didn't quite see last time or know about last time, and I get to go deeper, I get to go into a different layer. I really struggled with this definition. I sat with it for a while because, like I said before, I have really latched onto this idea of healing as a form of fixing for a really long time, right? It's like there's this idea that there's some part of me that's broken or defective because I can't, perform productively the way many of my peers can. And I thought if I could just heal enough to the point where I could show up less broken, then I would be healed. But that, unfortunately, is a never ending task, right? There's always something. If we're looking through the lens of brokenness, we'll always find it. And so for me, as I was sitting with this definition, I would say that for me, healing means having clarity, especially around my own harmful patterns and belief systems. And it's the ability to release what is no longer working. Maybe it was something that did work in the past, but it doesn't work anymore, and I'm able to let that go. Another possible definition for me is healing involves increasing my capacity. So that could be increasing my capacity for joy, or increasing my nervous system's capacity to handle day-to-day life. And ultimately, if I've learned anything in the past 3 years since I learned I was autistic, I would say that healing involves a heck of a lot more self-love, acceptance, and compassion. As I think everyone can hear, we're all coming from different perspectives, and our definition is going to be based on, what we've lived through and how we see it now. So let's move on into a little bit more of a deep dive into different modalities that we've all found along our journey. Patrice, are you okay if you go first on this one?
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just gonna basically ask you a few questions so that you can explain a little bit to everyone listening right now. What is IFS? If you could explain that in simple terms, what is IFS?
Yeah, so internal family systems is a wonderful modality where the understanding is that we are all comprised of a multitude of different parts, and we all have at core a self who is naturally calm, curious, compassionate, courageous, creative, and connected. And oftentimes in life, we go through things that are too hard for our systems to process in the moment. So our parts can take on these burdens, and they can take on roles that are really hard on our system and can also, make our lives more challenging. So in an internal family systems session, we would get to know who's showing up and get to know which parts are showing up and what jobs they're doing, if they want to be doing that job. And we build this relationship between the self and the part so that the part knows that it doesn't have to do all this work on its own. And most of the time it's very young and very stressed out trying to do this and doesn't want to do this job. And as this relationship's built, the self energy infuses all this compassion. And often this leads to an unburdening of the part, and the part can now take on a job that feels much better. what this looks like in a client's day-to-day life is that life starts to become more enjoyable and easier. That has been the case for me, certainly. So yeah, that's a very quick explanation. But ultimately that's what it's about, becoming more self-led. So becoming more led with all these C words, the compassion, creativity, courageousness. It's really a beautiful process.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That sounds really beautiful and easy to understand. So thank you for that. Can you tell us a little bit, how did you discover IFS? Like, what's been your journey with this process so far in your life?
So I discovered I had PTSD, what people now call complex PTSD. In about 2011, I was working in this office with many people my age, with similar educational backgrounds to me. And I just had nothing that I could relate to them about. And I found myself Googling the accounts of soldiers who'd returned from war because I could really understand their experiences of how afraid they felt all the time and how, hypervigilant. And this was before people were really talking about trauma as much as they are now. And I remember being really sheepish going to a therapist and saying, I actually think I have PTSD. I wasn't in a war, but I grew up in a quite challenging home where there was intergenerational alcoholism. So I did EMDR therapy for about 10 or 12 years. And that's also a very helpful modality if you have experienced trauma. In about 2013, 2014, a book was released called The Body Keeps the Score, which is by Bessel van der Kolk. And I know there is some controversy around some aspects of the book, but at the time, it was so validating to me to have my experience mirrored in that way. And he names and describes so many different interventions for trauma in that book. And I basically spent the last 15 years kind of going through them one by one. And internal family systems was one of those modalities. I do feel like people kind of find the modalities they need for whatever season of life they're in. And I just happened maybe 4 or 5 years ago to kind of come to a point where internal family systems really felt like it appealed to me and I was ready to give it a try. I'd heard some podcasts and had some luck in a few sessions I'd had. And it has brought so much compassion and self-acceptance into my life. There's a gentleness to the approach, which is very welcome. If I could go back and do it again, or if I could give any, kind of earned wisdom to those who've grown up in a more traumatic household, or, even those among us who are neurodivergent and have had experiences of our being dismissed, our emotions being dismissed, our struggles being dismissed. What can happen if you've never been held and validated? The danger is that you could end up getting a therapist or some healer who also doesn't validate or who dismisses. And in internal family systems, the training is such that the practitioners train to take care of their own part so that they're not leading from any part that has an agenda for the client or who might have a judgment of the client. And I found that to be incredibly healing as an experience. And a real moment for me came a few years ago where I went to my IFS practitioner with a lot of fear about, what I was afraid might happen politically in our country. And I was both expressing this fear, which was overwhelming, but I also had a fear that now I'm just going to trigger my practitioner's fear, that I'm going to have to take care of her feelings, or she's going to tell me what to do, tell me to stop watching the news or something. So I was ready for that. And I was just feeling so scared. I was like, whatever, I'll deal with it. When I finished all my crying and, kind of laying out worst case scenarios and how scary they felt for me, the practitioner just said, "That does sound really scary." And that was an amazing moment for me because I'd never just been held in my fear like that. And to not be told it was going to be okay, to not be, given unsolicited advice, to not be dismissed like, oh, you're making too big a deal out of this. That was just really revelatory. And that's when I really started getting training in this modality because I wanted to be able to do that for other people, to just hold them in their darkest moments and to just be a compassionate presence. So I think that's the answer to that one.
That was incredible. It sounds like there's so many benefits to IFS and your own transformative journey. is extraordinarily powerful. I remember the first time we met, actually. I remember, I'm being honest here because, this is what we offer our listeners. I remember actually being triggered because you were so calm and so peaceful and so gentle and such a beautiful soul. And I was like, I want to be this woman. Now, obviously not a healthy approach. And I've done my own work over the past 3 years. And I remember it's probably maybe 6 months into our professional relationship where I was like, oh, I'm not really triggered anymore. Like I'm learning from her, I'm growing with her, I'm like adopting some of these tools to like address some of my own parts. I'm like, oh, is this what it means? Like to not get triggered all the time? So I just want to say like thank you for like what you've imparted into my life over the past 3 years. It's been quite a joy to like watch and like watch you on your journey, but like the way you've helped mine.
Oh, thanks for sharing that, Cheryl. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And one final question for you, Patrice, before we go on to somatic experiences. Is there anything that somebody was thinking about, trying IFS? Is there anything you think they should know in terms of like any contraindications or anything that might be a bit of a drawback or appear to be a drawback?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Nothing comes to mind for me as like someone who it might not work for. But I will absolutely say that it's really not about the modality in the end. It's about the rapport you have with your practitioner and how safe you feel and how many of your parts you feel you can safely bring to this practitioner. And kind of similar to what I was saying before, if you have a session with somebody and something rubs you the wrong way, and I know this is something I went through too, being autistic, maybe something would rub me the wrong way, but it wouldn't hit me till like 2 weeks later. I didn't pay attention to those things for such a long time because of so many experiences of being dismissed. So my invitation to anyone who's, exploring any of these modalities is to really take your responses seriously. If something feels off, if you feel judged, if you don't feel like this is working in some way, yeah, I encourage you to bring that up with a practitioner also if it feels safe. But to really trust what's going on in your body in these sessions. Yeah, that's the most important thing.
Awesome. Thank you. Matt, is there anything that you want to ask Patrice about IFS?
Yeah, I have a lot of questions. So, yes, I'm always absolutely in awe of Patrice's aura and calmness, though I guess don't want to embarrass you, Patrice, and make this the Patrice show. But Patrice is a very calming presence always. Patrice, I think I've done IFS, and I like IFS a lot. And something that I always struggle with as myself, as somebody who sees an IFS practitioner, and as also as somebody who is influenced heavily by it, right, in my own work, how do we actually begin to identify our parts? Like, it's easy to think, oh, there's this part, there's that part, there's this part, but like, is there like a concrete way to like dig in and start exploring?
Yeah, so I'd say practically, working with the practitioner is really good because in the beginning, it really can feel like there's just a million different parts and they're all trying to talk over each other. I have this book and it's called Listening When Parts Speak, and it's by Tamala Floyd, and we can link it in the description. But when you get the book, there's this digital content and there's recorded meditations. And I do one of those every morning. And it's basically like listening for what part is present. And she asks you a bunch of questions. I find doing that, it's a 10-minute thing and I journal. And it is often just so revelatory and surprising what comes up. So parts mapping is basically what this is called. Just checking in the morning. Who's speaking? And even if it's not fleshed out yet, just even hearing what thoughts are coming up and if there's a feeling in your body, if there's a color, if there's a memory that's coming up, that's a good place to start. And these things take time. Like as Cheryl was saying, healing is a process and a full fleshed out understanding of parts takes time. I remember someone said, if you walk into a forest for 20 years, like you're not going to walk out of the forest in an afternoon. It's going to take time to walk out of the forest. So I think having patience allows parts to speak and for you to get to know them.
Do you find that it's helpful to name them with like prototype names or with proper names. I hear a lot of debate about that. Like, I should call this part Ryan, or this part Sue, or is this the warrior, or is this the pilot, or is this the street sweeper?
Well, I would actually ask the part what its name is and what its role is, because we treat them as though they are, people within us. And imagine if you had a person in front of you and you just named the person. Well, that's going to feel pretty dismissive to that person. So just ask. That's, the founder, Dick Schwartz, that's really his advice for basically everything. Just ask. If you have a question, ask the part. What's your name? What job are you doing for me? Yeah, often I get really amazing answers when I just ask inside. Thanks. Good questions, guys. Could you explain to us some somatic approaches to healing in simple terms?
So, yeah. So I think I'm gonna explain by kind of going through a few of the things that I do. Practice. So maybe if you're listening, you might find these useful. So, right, we understand that, like, when we talk about regulation or dysregulation, or if we're talking about our autonomic nervous system, this is the part of our nervous system which is responsible for automatic things like blinking and digestion and our heartbeat. But the really big one is that it's also our breathing. And the fun thing with breathing is that we can actually tap into our breathing, right? We can't control our heartbeat, we can't control our digestion, but we can actually influence a bit, / a lot, on our breathing, right? And often when I start talking about breathing, people go, oh no, he's talking about meditation. Oh no, talking about yoga. I'm afraid. Actually, our breath tells us so much about where we're at any day. How many of you are like sitting around going, it's really nice to talk about regulation, dysregulation, but actually, I don't even know what that means. Well, okay, cool. Like, let's put that on the side for a moment. Let's sit. Let's sit right now. Like the three of us, and for you listening, if you're driving your car, don't do this. You should be sitting at home. But like, just close your eyes. And I don't want you to meditate. I want you to just kind of pay attention to the quality of your breath right now. Don't try to control it, right? Is it going through your nose? Is it going through your mouth? What's your natural kind of place where your breath is going? Is it deep or is it shallow? Is it getting stuck somewhere in your throat or in your neck or in your upper chest, or is it going all the way to your tummy? Is it slow? Is it rapid? Is it cold? Is it warm? Is your in-breath longer than your out-breath? And just sit there for a second. If your in-breathing, your in-breath is shorter than your out-breath, you might be a little bit activated at the moment. You might be stressed. Something might be going on. If your out-breath is longer, you might be more relaxed. You might feel more safe. If it's going deeper, same. If it's getting stuck or caught somewhere, maybe there's something up. So now that might not sound like a lot, but that is already telling you, well, hold on. Where am I in space right now? Like, as autistic people, we don't often even know where we're at, right? And like, sometimes I say what I just said, and people go, that's so basic. Like, that's not that interesting. Come on. I go, well, how often do you actually sit and take 1 minute of your day to understand how you're breathing? If you're stressed or if you're not stressed, if you're relaxed or if you're not relaxed, if you're feeling safe or if you're not feeling safe. And what I like to do then is, if I were taking more time, actually start feeling more of what's going on in my body. Am I feeling tension somewhere, or am I not? Right? And I like to use this as these various check-ins throughout the day, because a lot of us are alexithymic, meaning that we have trouble expressing or sensing or placing emotions in our body. A lot of us also deal with poor interoception, so it's hard to actually feel our bodies as well. So I'm aware of that. So the breath is this really, really strong tool of seeing, just taking a pause and seeing where I'm at in my day, right? Like what it means, where it's going from there. Like, yeah, like that like requires us to talk to others and to think with ourselves. But already just being aware of your breath, right? huge thing that I like to do. When we're feeling anxious or we're feeling unsafe, something that I like to do, I like to create info dumps in my own brain about and make actually sit there and picture a happy place, right? Or a place that's regulating. So I often will think of my library, or I'll think of being in a certain place in the world with my partner, or I'll think of a certain movie and literally play that in my mind at the moment, right? As a way of trying to not trick your body, but to try to remind your body that you are safe. If you truly are objectively not in a dangerous physical place, right? Might be in a not safe place overall, but we always want to try to find safety. And no, of course, we don't want to trick ourselves into feeling falsely safe when we're not, right? That's also a form of dysregulation, right? Dysregulation is not simply always being in fight or flight and meltdowns or shutdowns and burnout, but also when we feel too safe when we shouldn't feel, right? That's also a form of dysregulation. But when we're in that kind of space, and it's okay to be not okay sometimes, right? We're not going to fool ourselves that there's no such thing as always being sturdy ship, but having those little a pre-played kind of playlist in your mind of where to go when you're doing that breathing exercise, I find really helpful.
Yeah, thank you. How did you discover your somatic approaches, and how have they changed your life, Matthew?
So I used to see a somatic therapist. So I've dealt with really, really poor interoception and alexithymia my whole life. I was diagnosed as a kid with all the kind of typical things that people who got diagnosed in the 1980s would also be diagnosed with. So dyspraxia, and we'll leave it at that. I don't want to go into my whole medical thing, but dyspraxia, big one, right? And very often as a kid, there was always you had your ABA therapist who was trying to teach you how to behave. And then you had the occupational therapist teaching you how to, tie your shoes or button your pants. And I've always really struggled with feeling my body and knowing what's going on. And I understood, and I also experienced a lot of trauma throughout most of my life, of various kinds, but in particular, a physical trauma, a number of incidents of physical trauma, violent trauma. And actually, I had seen that book, The Body Keeps the Score, Patrice, and that really... I actually hadn't even read it at that point, but I remember somebody was talking about it and explaining the thing, and I was like, oh, well, I'm for sure holding on to all this trauma in my thing. And I didn't actually investigate it. I just, when we see the typical thing, when you're autistic and you're burnout and you're searching for answers, somebody gives you something that sounds kind of close to what you're on, and you're just great, that must be the answer. And I was like, okay, that's super cool. Tell me more about that. And then that got me into Peter Levine and somatic experiencing, and I suck out a somatic experiencing therapist. And that just blew my mind. I remember it's hard to even explain, because in that first month, I think I saw him maybe 6 or 7 times. It was more than once a week usually. And I started seeing real change. I remember I went in there saying, I'm looking for the release. I'm holding on to stress on my body. And he's like, I don't know if that's exactly how that works. And I'm like, what do you mean? I thought that's what everybody says. He's like, it is, but it's also not, right? You can't come in thinking about that exclusively. And going for that, I did that for years. And it's hard to even explain what it meant, but for the first time in my life, I started to actually feel my body. I started to understand the difference. I had done so much occupational therapy in my life to try to help me identify my emotions and to feel things in my body, and various kind of exercises with my hands. Remember I once sent to you guys these stupid exercises that they love to teach, where you stand on your tippy toes and you play with putty and all these things. Within a few weeks, and then even more over months and years, I could tell the difference between fear and anxiety. And what you might be hearing that, no, fear and anxiety is the same thing. No, it's not. Real fear, fear of, trigger warning, getting killed. And, the anxiety over, I wonder how this party is going to be. I feel those in different places in my body. And I tell people that today, and they go, what the hell are you talking about? That's not a thing. And I go, I know. It wasn't a thing. And now it's a thing. we're not separate from our bodies, right? Our emotions, our bodies, our minds, like these are all the same thing. And we often get stuck as autistic people in our heads, right? We're very good at that logic and intellect, so they say. I'm not convinced that's actually true, but so they say. But we're much less into our emotions and into our bodies. Our emotions are always told they're wrong, and our bodies, very often that those interoception issues and dyspraxia comes with most of us, right? So it's very difficult to feel our bodies. And we're losing 2/3 of the picture that way. So I've been really, really, it's huge.
Yeah, thank you for that. It is huge. Would you say, are there any drawbacks to this approach or anyone who it wouldn't serve?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the yes, and it's always a yes and, right? I've dealt with body dysphoria my entire life. And there's a lot of studies out there that show that a lot of the reasons why a lot of us deal with interoception is exactly because of that, and it's sort of serving as a buffer, and this is where alexithymia comes in as well. So it's kind of contained. For me, it was contained for a long time. And when I started being more in touch with my body, actually my body dysphoria, dysphoria, I don't know which is the right word even to use, but forgive me for my English, they came out that much more. And so it did undo a can of worms, so to speak. And so that's something to be aware of. Like when you start going and you digging in, and I think it's like anything when you go to therapy or you go to coaching or you go to EMDR, or if you, start going to your place of worship, right? Like whenever you start doing something new that's like deep, you're gonna unearth some stuff, and it's not always gonna be pretty. Hell, I know people who have gotten like super traumatized from doing, shadow work on one of those iPhone meditation apps, right? So like all the more with somebody who's a professional, right? So like you always have to be aware of those things, especially if you're somebody who deals with a lot of issues around your body. And I don't regret it, but we're not always ready for it, right?
Yeah. Thanks, Matthew. Cheryl, did you have any questions for Matthew?
I don't. I just wanted to say thank you because that was a really, really comprehensive, explanation. And I love the exercise of connecting with my breath and just observing it. And, like any other approach to healing, I guess I just like hearing the fact that the yes and, we want to be open to these experiences and we want to be open to healing, but we also have to understand that yes, there could be some things that come up and there could be some things that are just really hard to look at. And so, finding somebody that you trust, as Patrice, you said earlier, trusting your intuition, being able to say, you know what, I think this person is good support for me. Oh, this one, no, I don't feel safe here. I think that can be really helpful when, selecting a practitioner.
I want to know all about BodyTalk because I've heard Cheryl talking about BodyTalk for the better part of 3 years. And I've actually never gotten to hear, I mean, I always get pieces of it from Cheryl. You'll give me a little bit here and there. We never actually got to put you in the hot seat and go, hey, Cheryl, what is BodyTalk?
Well, thank you. I'm so excited about this. So, first, I think I'm just going to start by saying a couple seconds of how I discovered BodyTalk, and then I'll explain a little bit what it is and how it's changed my life. I was teaching in Iraq back in 2015. It was just a very brief time. And I realized teaching grade 1 in Iraq was not where I wanted to be and what I wanted to be doing. And I came across BodyTalk and the opportunity to train. And so starting in early 2016, I started a bit of an internship training with the practitioner. And I got certified in 2018. And so I've been practicing this for a good 9 years of my life. And it's been transformative. So BodyTalk feels like I'm a cosmic consciousness detective. It gives me the tools to identify and release the harmful patterns and stuck emotions that have been hidden. So if you imagine that we're all carrying things under the surface, right? It could be emotionally charged memories. It could be belief systems that don't serve you anymore. It could be these patterns that you're like, why do I keep repeating this 17,000 times? And we just don't know what the roots are and we don't know what's going on. And we just kind of feel like we're banging our heads against a wall. And for me, BodyTalk is like the flashlight. It allows me to see what's going on beneath the surface, bring it to the light so that I can look at it with my conscious mind and be able to release it. instead of letting everything operate underneath the surface. So if you imagine that iceberg that sunk the Titanic, right? Most of what's operating in our lives is underneath the surface. We don't see much of it. We don't really understand much of it. So BodyTalk has been a huge flashlight for me. BodyTalk incorporates traditional Chinese medicine as well as current understandings of quantum mechanics, kind of, and everything in between. Is very safe, it's gentle, it's non-invasive. We work with your inner wisdom to discover, well, really, we work with your inner wisdom using a technique similar to muscle testing, and it allows us to discover your unique priorities. So the saying in BodyTalk is you might have 100 problems, but only one priority at a time. So it makes it very able to focus on one thing at a time based on your own inner wisdom. Because somebody might come to me and say, well, like, I really want to deal with X, right? Maybe it's, physical pain. Maybe it's, insomnia. And that's what is showing up, but we don't know why it's showing up. We don't diagnose. We don't prescribe. We don't try to figure it out. We go into a session. We connect to the larger self or the larger source of wisdom. We use muscle checking, which is, like I said, very similar to muscle testing. And then we discover, using a very systematic approach, it's like this huge chart that basically covers every single organ, endocrine, body part, and system in your whole being. And we just literally were asking that larger wisdom, is this the priority? No? Okay, is this the priority? And when you get to the priority, then we can work on it. Then we can look at it. And it's amazing what comes up in a session, what people have been holding on to, and what we get a chance to rebalance, improve communication between your body, mind, and spirit. We restore the balance, communication, and harmony. We identify and release trapped emotions and emotionally charged events. We unearth subconscious patterns and belief systems that are keeping you stuck. We provide insight into what is keeping you from moving forward. We strengthen your connection to your intuition and your body's wisdom. And it's so safe, and it's so gentle, and it's so easy. Once we discover priorities, we use some hand positions. We do some tapping on the head, heart, and abdomen to represent the three brains. Because for many of us, we live off of our brain in our heads, and we totally forget that we have a heart brain and a gut brain. So being able to integrate those brains and have them working together shifts a lot of things for a lot of people. I worked with one client. She had writer's block. We did a session. The next day she came back because we were in the middle of a training, and she's like, I finished the children's book I was working on. Right? Do we know how that happened? No, we don't. We don't care. We don't need to know all of the analytical ways that, the things that were keeping her stuck. But BodyTalk gives people the opportunity to focus on a new possible reality. Shift our focus, shift our attention, right? That's why I always ask clients when they come in, if you could snap your fingers and create 3 new things in your life, what would they be, right? It allows them to tap into that creative, intuitive side, right? I might have a client come in and say, oh my gosh, it was such a hard month. There was this pain, and there was this problem, there was this. And I listen, I give them space to share. And then I say, what was the best thing that happened this month? And without fail, there will be something, and they'll just start talking, and their energy shifts. And immediately you can tell that their focus has shifted from all of the things that were going wrong into something that went right. And that's a beautiful energy to be able to go into the rest of the session with. And now I can take as many questions as you want.
Thank you so much for that. Can you give us a concrete example of how body work can be helpful specifically for an ADHD person who's coming in a state of burnout?
Yeah, so when it comes to, body work is a very broad category. BodyTalk is one specific aspect of that. And in my experience as an ADHD person who has experienced burnout, for me, there's so many things going on in my brain, but there's so many things that I can't physically do. And there seems to be a huge disconnect between my mind and my body. I might know logically that there is no separation, as Matt, you said, but in that moment of burnout, it feels like there's this huge gap between the loops in my mind and the shoulds and the, intrusive thoughts and my body's absolute lack of energy and complete exhaustion and pain. And so with BodyTalk, because it does not rely solely on our intellect, does not solely rely on our analytical minds, and it does not require somebody to sit there and talk about all of their problems, those things, we can put them off to the side. We bring in the intuition. We bring in the body's larger wisdom. We bring in almost like, just for a moment, handing the reins over, handing the driver's, the wheel of the car over to somebody else. And it's not really somebody else, it's just the part of us that is more than capable of handling it and revealing that wisdom to us. So we don't have to do all that heavy lifting on our own. And I find that to be really, really relaxing. Most of my clients will fall asleep or get very, very relaxed. They enter the parasympathetic state, which is the rest and digest state, which that's the only state that true healing can occur. I don't care what modality you're working in, you have to be in that parasympathetic state, because if you are in fight or flight, your body can't relax to the point of allowing anything. Right? So I think the parasympathetic state aspect and the tapping into the larger wisdom so that your intellectual mind doesn't have to do all that heavy lifting, those two pieces are really vital, especially for an ADHD person. Because I've seen clients, they talk about less physical discomfort with lower stress levels, easier, to fall asleep. I've had people increase their creativity. My biggest thing that I hear often the most is, I'm starting to listen to my body more. I'm starting to listen to my body, right? I don't push through so often and pretend that everything's okay, even when it's not. I trust that there's a larger wisdom that, is speaking to me, that we hold that wisdom in our own bodies. So I think those are some things that are really important to anybody, but especially an ADHD person.
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl, for sharing all that. It sounds like a really effective modality.
I like the idea of falling asleep.
We joke that I should have been advertising as a sleep aid instead of anything else.
Well, why not? I mean, I feel like, when I first started, really, really, really doing stupid kind of scheduling and coaching and being like, all right, this is my new job now. The thing that people wanted to talk about the most, and I think because it was the beginning of the pandemic, this went away pretty fast, but this was still this is literally March 2020, right? People wanted help with sleeping. And I did this CBTI, which is the CBT for sleeping, an online training for it, because everybody wanted to talk about sleep. And then suddenly, nobody ever asked me about sleep ever again.
All sorts of phases of people's journey.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. COVID came and nobody wanted to talk about sleep anymore. But I suspect that we still all struggle with sleep.
I think the step before that is just being able to let go enough to get into that relaxed state. And I think a lot of people struggle with that, all the modalities that we talked about today can probably connect to that and help different people learn to just, I don't know, maybe just trust a little bit more in themselves. I think I can only speak for BodyTalk, but it feels like I'm able to trust myself more, and I'm able to trust what I'm feeling. I'm able to trust the intuitive messages that I get. And I think that's been transformative for me, because I certainly didn't for a long time. All right. So before we wrap up, it is important to note that we fully recognize you cannot heal your way out of oppressive and exploitative systems. Current approaches to healing are often exclusionary due to financial and time constraints, as well as too focused on the individual rather than in the context of community and systems. In other words, we fully acknowledge that IFS, BodyTalk, and somatic techniques are simply 3 tools that can bring healing and transformation into a person's life. But they are only 3. Much more work needs to be done to change systems that abuse and exploit in the first place. And there we have it, an intense and autistic discussion around 3 unique tools that can assist people, especially autistic people, reconnect with our inner wisdom and rejected parts, build intuition, and strengthen self-compassion. As a reminder, we are all peer support coaches within the Autistic Peer Support Coaching Collective, offering a variety of free and paid intentionally autistic spaces. You can learn more and follow us at our website, autisticcoaches.com. You can support us by sharing the podcast with your friends, peers, and anyone who lives with, works with, or loves an autistic person. Thank you for listening to us talking about autistic stuff for autistic people. New episodes come out on the 2nd and 4th Mondays of the month. Keep the conversation going on our Blue Sky feed, or send us your constructive comments and feedback via email at autisticstuffpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, consider checking out a new approach to transformation you feel might be beneficial as you reevaluate what healing might look and feel like for you.
Autistic Stuff for Autistic People is a production of Fox and Draven Media. For more podcasts from Fox and Draven Media, visit our website, foxanddravenmedia.com.